Alright, it's Christmas time, the most wonderful time of the year, so I just had to make a Christmas video. Last year, I ended up making these small TikTok reviews on 25 specials for 25 days of Christmas, but it required a lot of reaching, like covering The Nightmare Before Christmas as a Christmas movie. And when I ran out of stuff, I went to shows like iCarly and Johnny Test to talk about their Christmas episodes. I even had to reach for something like the Hip Hop Nutcracker, which I didn't have much to say about, but I needed 25 things to talk about. This time, I'm just going to keep it simple and stick to mostly the classics, stick to stuff that's in my wheelhouse. These are going to be short recaps with input when needed. I reworked the script for this video to make sure that happened because the original script had this video at an hour and 27 minutes. But that was because I was giving these big recaps on the movie when I wanted this video to be mostly about my thoughts and ratings on the movies rather than trying to serve as the movie and say every detail. So yeah, short recaps with input when needed. Then at the end of everything that I talk about, I'm going to say my final thoughts and give a letter grade. Now, before I get in here, I just wanted to give some honorable mentions, some shout outs to some things that I'm not going to be covering in depth. Reindeer in here was a fun, newer movie about how an introvert finally got a best friend. But I didn't want to spend a section on it when that's the extent of what I have to say. It's a fun movie. That's it. Next, from what I remember, Good Luck Charlie, It's Christmas was an amazing Christmas movie and it actually had plot significance for the show. Amazing movie, but I'm not going to cover it because when I watch Good Luck Charlie again, I want it to be fresh. When I covered it on TikTok last year, it was off memory and the small amount of notes that I took from my last time that I watched it in 2020. So yeah, I'm committed to keeping it fresh. But yeah, amazing movie, deserves a shout out. Lastly, I wanted to give a shout out to Batman Arkham Origins. It's not a TV show or a movie, but it's one of the only Christmas games that I'm aware of. There's not really enough Christmas games to make a full video, so I just wanted to give it some love in this video. I always play through it or watch a playthrough of it every December. It's just as much of a tradition as watching Christmas specials, so I wanted to give it a shout out for contributing positively to my holiday experiences throughout the years. All right, now it's time to get in here. Starting off, I have to talk about A Charlie Brown Christmas. They're going to show Charlie Brown being Charlie Brown, just being a major downer while the most wonderful time of the year is going on, so that's not nice. But the main theme of this special was really showcased at the end when Charlie was tasked with getting this aluminum tree, but he wanted to fight against commercialism and ended up getting a ramshackle small tree that was the only real tree there because it just felt right to him. No one liked it at first, but eventually they grew to like it and they realized that Christmas isn't all about getting the most expensive things. Now here's what I have to say about this special. I didn't like anything that was related to the play, just didn't care for it at all, especially when Lucy had Schroeder play all of that music, so I'm just saying that. Also, just finding out that this guy's name is Schroeder, so that's nice to know. Now, for their message, I love the message that they're going for, like the most expensive tree or the most expensive things in general aren't needed to have a good Christmas time. But it's a questionable decision to take the ramshackle tree with the knowledge that no one's going to like it when Charlie Brown had the opportunity to give everyone what they wanted originally. But at least they warmed up to it in the end and they were able to learn an important lesson. So there's that. For me, A Charlie Brown Christmas is nostalgic. It's always in my holiday lineup, and later on, I was able to appreciate the lesson that it was trying to teach. But in the end, I might just retire this Christmas special from my lineup. It's not otherworldly, and there was barely any entertainment in there for me, so for a rating or a grade, I'll have to give it a C+ for this list. Now it's time for Diary of a Wimpy Kid Christmas. Cabin Fever, the movie that I held out for. The reason why this video had no chance to be released before December 8th because I wanted to include it no matter what. Diary of a Wimpy Kid has always been part of my life. Like, I've never outgrown it. It's a yearly read. And ever since they started making these animated movies, I was interested because they could start giving life to books that weren't able to get a live action movie. Cabin Fever is the first animated movie that they released that didn't have a live action movie, so I was interested to see how it would play out. Now, something that I was a bit disappointed in was that they took out all of the filler, like the school stuff with the bullying and taking the playground stuff away, and Alfredo was missing, and they didn't have the holiday bazaar stuff with the drummies, and they didn't have the net critter stuff, and they didn't have the Kenny Centazzo stuff with the forgery. That stuff wasn't typical filler or fluff. Like, some of those storylines were fun and good for world building and adding personality to the book. And I know that they're working with limited time, but it's a shame that all of that stuff got cut and the bulk of this movie was Greg and Raleigh avoiding the cops and everyone being trapped inside because of the snowstorm. A strong suit for these movies is that they're not recreating situations from the book word for word. Like, maybe the characters will be placed in a similar situation, but it's not always the exact same, giving some value to these movies. Like in Roderick Rules, instead of Greg being a part of Roderick's party eventually, like in the live action movie, he was actually shut out of the party completely and used the pictures for blackmail. So in this movie, the holiday bazaar isn't a thing, so that's not how they got in trouble. They're going to get in trouble by accidentally rolling a big snowball down a hill and damaging this snowplower's truck. So yeah, that's how they're wanted in this movie. It's not a game-breaking change or anything, but it's nice to see a different take. What I was really interested in was how they were going to handle the family, because in the book, Frank was away from the house while the snowstorm was going on, basically making him an irrelevant character because he wasn't in Greg's presence. While in the movie, he was there with the family, to which I have conflicting feelings. I like that he's there because he gets to be an impactful part of the plot. But in the book, he wasn't there, and the Heffleys had to learn how to fend for themselves without him. But it's not a big change. Although this movie isn't better than the book, I can say that this version of Greg is better than the book version because at least he was willing to take accountability for his actions, while in the book, he shied away from taking accountability. In the end, I'm going to give this a B+. It would probably help this movie if it didn't already have a book and I didn't have the knowledge that this movie had the potential to be so much more. But it's still Diary of a Wimpy Kid at the end of the day, and even with the lack of content, I still had a good time with it. Alright, moving on, time for Frosty the Snowman. So, how the story goes is that this magic man that wasn't good at magic threw his hat away, and the kids used this magic hat to activate Frosty the Snowman. For most of the special, the kids, but mainly Karen, she's going to try and get Frosty to the North Pole so he can live forever, while the magician is going to be hunting them down, trying to get his hat back because it could probably go for a lot. Now, before I say anything, I've got to say that regardless of the quality and what I have to say about this special, the song went crazy. Actually, Frosty the Snowman was never a part of my Christmas lineup, and the only way that I knew of him was through the song. I actually played the song for a 7th grade band performance, so yeah, this song is heat. But for the special, I will admit that it tugged at my heartstrings at the end when I thought that Frosty was actually gone and the magician ended him when he locked Frosty and Karen in the greenhouse. That's got to be some form of child endangerment, by the way. But yeah, me feeling a way about Frosty potentially being gone is big because originally, when the kids started loving on him, there wasn't enough build-up. But after Frosty went on that adventure with Karen and they both looked out for each other, that was enough to make the relationship satisfying. Frosty is new to my lineup, just started watching it last year. I'll give it a B grade. It's solid, it's heartwarming, but it's not top tier. I wish that they would have honed in on the true meaning of Christmas a bit more with the magician's Grinch tactics. But yeah, in the end, it's something that I wouldn't mind watching as an appetizer for the top tier stuff. Alright, now it's time for Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer. as simple as it sounds, it's a story about Grandma Spankenheimer getting run over by Santa's reindeer and her family, mainly her grandson Jake, trying to find her. But it's not going to be easy for Jake to find her because of Cousin Mel. Before I talk about her role in this movie, I just wanted to say something that I noticed about Cousin Mel last year. Cousin Mel looks like Daphne Blake with the hair and just her figure in general. I'm wondering if there was some potential inspiration. Also, not Mel, but Jake's sister in this was actually named Daphne, so I'm wondering if there was some connection or this was all just coincidental. But yeah, Cousin Mel in this movie is gonna try and get rich by selling Grandma Spankenheimer's store. And this is by any means necessary, literally committing crimes to make sure that Grandma doesn't get found. So that's going to be a big storyline to focus on in this movie. Alright, first off, before I rate the movie, I've got to say that the theme song is great. Really, all of the music is great. But the theme song is a yearly listen for me, especially near Christmas time. Also, I liked how the movie used the song, especially in the scene where they almost word for word set the song lyrics to try and convince Grandma not to walk out the door. So the song is good. But also, the movie is good. The movie represents what I've come to terms with in the past couple of years. When Jake didn't get any presents and was just excited that he had his grandmother back, that showcased that Christmas isn't all about getting. It isn't all about getting material objects. While it would be nice to receive material objects, and I wouldn't say no to them because that's just today's society, over the years, I've just become more content with not necessarily getting the most expensive gifts material wise and considering the most expensive gifts and important gifts to be family. So I like that this movie doesn't shy away from that and backtrack on the progress that was made by giving Jake some presents in the end and having this fairy tale ending where he gets everything. Like, this ending feels real. So for the rating, I'll happily give this an A+. It's an amazing movie, and this year, it solidified its place in my yearly Christmas lineup. Now the next step is becoming that household name that gets reruns for 50, 60, even 70 years out. It's probably not going to get that nod worldwide, but it will for me. It's amazing. Now, it's time to talk about the Grinch movies. I'll just recap the base version. Then, when talking about the more modern versions, I'm going to talk about the additions and the stuff that I liked and disliked. Alright, time for How the Grinch Stole Christmas, 1966. It's a tale about how the Grinch converted from naughty to nice. He's going to start out hating Christmas because his heart was a few sizes too small, so he's going to steal a bunch of Christmas presents from everyone. But then when he realized that everyone was unfazed by this because to them, the true meaning of Christmas wasn't about material items, it was more of a family thing. Once he realized that, his heart grew and he gave the stuff back. That's all for How the Grinch Stole Christmas 1966. It's only a 25-minute special. Now for How the Grinch Stole Christmas 2000. This movie was very similar to the 1966 version, especially when the Grinch actually went out there and stole Christmas. Like, it plays out almost the same. But this movie right here was more focused on expanding the world and giving the city more personality, especially Cindy Lou. While she was important to some extent in 1966, it really gets dialed up in this movie as she's really a main character and she's really fighting for the Grinch to be included in the citywide events in this one. So it's good for expanding the world and giving these characters some roles instead of just being NPCs. The other thing that this movie is useful for is giving the Grinch a backstory, an origin story like it's Batman Arkham Origins. In 1966, it was really just stated that the Grinch's heart is small. He hates Christmas, all of that stuff, but it never really got a reason attached to it. This movie gives the origin story. What happened was the Grinch always somewhat hated Christmas, like it was in his heart from birth. But one day, he got a little crush on this girl named Martha. So he made her a Christmas present, but he got roasted by everyone because his face was messed up and that got him to hate Christmas permanently, and after that, he left the town. In 1966, I would say that I wasn't on the Grinch's side because he was just opposition for no reason. But now that I see his backstory where he had a crush and he was trying to make inroads, but he got bullied and that derailed him, now I'm on the Grinch's side and totally understand his feelings, and I'm glad that they gave him a backstory. I'm glad that they gave him a purpose and reason, unlike in 1966. Outside of all that, it was fun to see Jim Carrey in another role. I got my introduction to him through the Sonic movies and heard that he was a big time name and actually had some other projects, but I've never seen them. This is my first time seeing Jim Carrey in another role, and he was solid. Now it's time for the Grinch Elimination 2018. At the end of the day, it's still the Grinch, but there's a few changes to list off. One of them is that they added a new character in there, Fred the Reindeer. He's not a big addition, but he will take part in some of the Grinch's adventures throughout this movie, so it's worth mentioning. Also, another change is that with a modern movie comes modern music. This is reflected in their song choices throughout the movie, and they even updated the Grinch theme song for a more modern feel. I also noticed that in this version, the Grinch respected his dog Max more. In previous versions, he was more controlling, like literally in the first iteration, the Grinch forced Max to be his reindeer. But in this version, Max actually got promoted to being a reindeer as a reward for all of his hard work, and overall, he just treated Max nicer in this version before his heart grew 3 sizes. Another thing that I noticed is that just like how the Grinch Stole Christmas 2000, they gave the Grinch an origin story, but they made it a bit different. In this version, the Grinch was in an orphanage. He just seemed to be a normal person, but no one got him anything for Christmas, so that fueled his rage. I like 2000's version more because I've been talking about this a decent bit throughout this video, and it's the fact that Christmas isn't all about material objects. That is what the Grinch freaked out about in 2018 when it's not all about the material. No one's really obligated to give him anything. There's folks in this world that don't have loved ones, or even if they have them, they don't receive anything for Christmas, but they still keep their head held high regardless. I don't like that the Grinch takes a more materialistic view on Christmas in 2018, when in 2000, his motive for being evil was perfect. He got hurt because he was too loving, too caring towards someone in the season of giving, and he got bullied for that, so it hits deeper. The last change that I noticed is that in 2000, Cindy Lou was somewhat of a Grinch advocate, a Grinch supporter. Like, that was her main storyline in that movie. But in 2018, just like in 1966, they're kind of distant until Christmas Eve. And in 2018, they decided to make Cindy Lou's plot about caring for her mother and wanting good things to happen to her on Christmas because she's been such a good mother. 2018 Cindy's plot was a way to fill time, while Cindy Lou in 2000 was just a more active presence in the Grinch's story and getting the town to change their opinion on him. Now with that out of the way, it's time for the ratings. Coming in third with a C+ rating, it's How the Grinch Stole Christmas 1966. It's simple, it gets its point across, but with the others, there's more meat on the bone, more world building, while telling the same story, making 1966 not needed. The others are better. In second, with an A- rating, I have How the Grinch Stole Christmas 2000. Like I said, it expanded the world, especially Cindy Lou. Like, it's her best showing. Also, it gives the Grinch a legitimate backstory, and it's better than the 2018 iteration. It's a good movie and I appreciate what it provides, but the movie is a bit too long for me, which would be a wild statement for me when I was a kid. This movie is about an hour and 45 minutes, and back then, whenever I heard the word movie, that usually meant lock in for a 2-hour experience, which this movie was in line with. But it might just be the TikTokification of content and getting used to that, but I just can't sit through anything longer than, say, an hour 10, maybe even an hour 20, but after that, I get disinterested. So yeah, How the Grinch Stole Christmas brings a lot, but it's going to be in second place in the Grinch trilogy. And in first, with an A grade, it's going to be The Grinch 2018. Although it didn't have the storytelling of 2000, 2018 was modernized and more in line with today, like I already talked about with its music choices. Also, the animation is amazing. It's vibrant and colorful and just makes the live action version of 2000 look dull. Also, there's the fact that there's more freedom and flexibility with animated projects over live action projects, so there's that. Also, this movie is about an hour and 27 minutes. While not a whole lot shorter than 2000, I still appreciate the shortened time, which didn't take away from the movie actually. They were still able to tell a cohesive story that was enjoyable. I just like 2000's story more, and the runtime of this movie wasn't going to change that. So yeah, in third is 1966, in second is 2000, and in first is 2018. The Grinch wasn't part of my yearly rotation. I actually just started watching them last year for 25 days of Christmas movie reviews, and 2000 was one that I actually watched this year for this video. Glad that I found them. They're solid. Now it's time for Home Alone. I decided to only go with the first two because if I talked about all of them, then it'd probably take an hour to get through all of them. 2 is a solid number, and the first two actually have Macaulay Culkin in them, which is supposed to be the draw for these movies. I never actually watched the others, only the first one, but I know that whenever I hear Home Alone, it's not about the others, not even the sequel. It's about the 1990 movie, so I had to cover that guaranteed. Then, so I'm actually watching something new that I haven't seen before, I decided to watch the sequel. Enough explanation, time to get in here. So Home Alone is about this guy named Kevin McAllister accidentally getting left at home while his family went on Christmas vacation, leaving him on his own like he's Brady from Teen Beach 2. Kevin likes it at first because the McAllister household was a madhouse, like stuck in the middle before stuck in the middle, the loud house before the loud house. There was just too much pandemonium in the house, so he liked living alone. He lived it up like his name was Big Nate. But once the novelty wore off and these burglars named the Wet Bandits emerged, Kevin got serious about protecting his house until his family got back. This movie is solidly in the A+ tier. It's fun and entertaining with Kevin's antics just always being a step ahead of the Wet Bandits. It had high stakes, and whenever Kevin and the Wet Bandits were in a scene together, those were the best parts of the movie. And although this movie didn't push that Christmas isn't about getting gifts and toys, it's about spending time with your family narrative, it was still able to push that family is important, and yeah, there's going to be some disagreements. There might even be days when you wish them out of your life. Even with all that, they're still your family and there's no bridges that can't be repaired, and in the end, there's a reason why you were put onto this earth with them. So yeah, Home Alone is a yearly watch and I intend for it to stay that way. It's amazing. Now it's time for Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. Apparently, the character development and what had been established in the prequel didn't carry over to this movie, as a lot of the kids, especially Buzz, still felt the same way about Kevin, saw him as a punching bag of sorts. And the mother didn't learn anything from the last movie because when Kevin was going on about his terrible family, she said that Kevin got his wish last year. Maybe he'll get it again because they were going on another vacation. This is just total drama all-stars levels of character derailment and inconsistency. It's in the same continuity because all throughout the movie, they refer back to stuff that happened in the last movie, so this just feels like an easy way to set up another movie. So anyways, yeah, Kevin's gonna get in the van this time, get on a plane, but he ends up in New York while his family ends up where they're supposed to be in Florida. So it's another story about the family trying to get back to Kevin and Kevin living on his own, but this time with more opposition because he had the Wet Bandits coming after him and some hotel staff. This movie totally took ideas and it was structured similarly to the first film when I was going in expecting something different. But after watching it, I've got to say that they didn't need to change the format. It worked. And even though it was similar, they were able to expand on it, with New York being a more interesting place to have the movie set in than Illinois. Also, they gave Kevin more adversity, more opposition to deal with, which led to more fun. Old Man Marley and the Pigeon Lady are a draw. Like, I don't have a preference. They both serve their roles in the story well, but I definitely like the Kevin versus Wet Bandits house defense section more than in the first movie, because the Wet Bandits called back to stuff that happened in the last movie and still got dealt with handily. This movie is going to get an A+, just like Home Alone, but it's better than the prequel. I said this at the beginning of the Home Alone section. Whenever I hear about Home Alone, that's only talking about the 1990 movie and nothing else. This movie is swept under the rug in favor of Home Alone when it's better. Home Alone was first, but I've never been a fan of that. Since it came first, it's the best because without it, there's no series logic. That doesn't make it the best. Actually, sequels are made to expand the world and sometimes fix problems that were present in the first movie. Not all sequels are better than the original, but sequels are made to hopefully be better than what came before, so I'm not surprised that a sequel is better than the original. Home Alone 2 is better, and I'm glad that I decided to make this Christmas video because I never would have watched it otherwise. It's a great movie. Now it's time for The Naughty Nine, a movie that was just released recently. It's about this guy named Andy and his friend Dulce. They perform heists like it's GTA 5. Nah, Grand Theft Auto 6 since the trailer dropped. And because of this, Santa leaves them with no presents. So they assemble the Naughty Nine to execute their biggest heist yet, breaking into Santa's village and stealing their toys, Splinter Cell settings. What I liked about this movie was the role reversal. Since Bethany dropped out of the heist, Andy got his good sister Laurel to go on the heist. Andy taught Laurel how to be naughty, which resulted in her breaking rules and being okay with that. But then Andy became the good one and hated how he ruined such a good person for his selfish gain. It even got to a point where he really stood up for Laurel and tried to get her off the naughty list when they were basically at war with each other at the beginning of this movie. The heist was so fun, and I also liked the sibling bonding that they were trying to push, especially since I have a sibling. And most of the Christmas movies that I've seen, they're more family centric, love your family, and rarely centered around siblings and loving and respecting them. So I like that about this movie. I went in expecting not to like it because it's not that Disney Channel got bad. It's just that I'm growing up and it's normal for stuff that's made for children of today to not appeal to me, entertain me. I went in not expecting anything and got much more than I expected. I love this movie, so it's gonna get an A. It's solid. All right, now it's time for all of the other reindeer. It's all about a mix-up. When Olive and this flea were listening to this radio, they heard that Blitzen got injured in flight practice and Santa will have to rely on all of the other reindeer. Olive was convinced that Olive was said, while the flea was convinced that Olive was said. Add this, along with the fact that the flea unintentionally gave her more misinformation about how her owner was upset at her for being the reason why Santa isn't flying this year. All of this inspired Olive to go on this journey to the North Pole to be the replacement reindeer. Despite not being a reindeer, she was just a dog. And all throughout this journey, the postman was trying to stop Olive and anyone that helped her because he was just flat out a Grinch. He didn't like Christmas because of the extra workload. So that's the story. One thing that I was surprised about when I watched this last year was that Richard Stans didn't have a huge main role in this movie, considering that he had a similar problem as Olive with his name. I remembered him being a big character, but apparently not. But yeah, this movie is basically a satire, making fun of Christmas norms and traditions, like when Olive finally got to the sleigh part where she was being drugged by the reindeer because she couldn't fly. She asked where Rudolph was, and one of the reindeer said that he was just an urban legend, and there's much more of that. Also, the adventure was fun and enjoyable, especially for 45 minutes. Like, the adventure felt like it was longer than it was. I like this movie, but I've been handing out a lot of A's recently. This movie doesn't really hold up when compared to those other juggernauts, but it's not bad, so it's gonna get a B. And yeah, I remember watching Olive on some one-off Christmas in like 2008. I believe it was on Cartoon Network then. I never saw it again, but I always kind of remembered it. I just liked being able to go back to this movie and understand it more and appreciate this movie for what it was, instead of it just being a first grade, second grade memory. So yeah, it was solid. Now it's time for the Polar Express. It's about this guy named, well, I used to call him Polar, but he doesn't even have a name, along with some other characters in the movie. Apparently, it's Hero Boy, so I'll just be calling him that. It's about him being skeptical of Santa's existence, so on Christmas Eve, he's given a chance to rectify this by getting on this magical train headed to the North Pole so he can meet Santa. And along the way, he gains friends like Billy and Hero Girl that are definitely going to be important to his story and the end result, especially Hero Girl. A few years ago, I heard this take about the Polar Express that got a lot of traction. Can't remember if it was on Twitter or YouTube, but it said that the Polar Express had no plot. But that's just not true. Billy and Hero Boy entered this journey not believing in Santa, while Hero Girl believed in Santa. This was reflected in the song When Christmas Comes to Town, where all of Hero Girl's lines were positive, showcasing her belief in Santa, while Billy's lines were negative, showcasing his disbelief in Santa because he hasn't seen any solid evidence. Also, when they got lost at the North Pole and the only way to find Santa was listening to the sleigh bells, Hero Girl could always hear them. Billy heard them at a point, but Hero Boy could never hear them throughout their journey to Santa. It was only when a bell flew off a reindeer and landed in front of him. That's when Hero Boy said that he believed, despite not seeing Santa yet, especially since the crowd was blocking him. But sometimes believing means believing in things that you can't necessarily see, which Hero Girl mastered, but Hero Boy was trying to learn that over the course of this movie. So when he finally believed in Santa, despite having no solid evidence that he was real, that's when he started hearing the sound of the bell, because throughout this journey, he learned to believe. These roles were showcased even more when they got back on the train and the conductor punched lead on Hero Girl's ticket because she was a leader. She was a big driving force in this movie, being there for Billy when he was alone and leading her friends to Santa when at that point she was the only one that could hear the bells, the only one that believed in Santa. And Hero Boy's ticket said believe, just keep on believing in Santa, but also just believe in general, regardless of if he can see something visually or not. Unfortunately for Hero Boy, he placed the bell that he got from Santa in the ripped pocket and had to go home empty-handed. But when he woke up on Christmas Day, the last present was the bell. He could hear it, his sister could hear it, but his parents couldn't hear it, exposing how they really felt about Christmas and Santa. And as the years went on, everyone in Hero Boy's circle stopped hearing the bell, but he can still hear it because he always kept believing. It's such a good plot, but it's one that I didn't fully get until this year, despite watching it last year. Now, I totally understand what they're going for, and I'm glad that I can, because I was once in that boat of this movie has no plot. It's all about the songs and the magical journey. But I'm glad that I actually got to hone in on this stuff this time, and now I truly understand the meaning of this movie. And I hope that as I become more mature and knowledgeable, I can understand more about the complexities of this plot, dive a bit deeper. But yeah, this movie totally has a plot and the story was told well. Also, character-wise, I had just come around to realizing that while he's not the main character, the conductor totally carries this movie, especially when he was conducting while the ice was cracking with that left, right. He was such a fun character. Also, out of everything that I talked about, this movie has the best soundtrack, and it's not even good for a Christmas movie. It's good in general. Speaking of songs, I remember playing this for band in, I believe it was my freshman year of high school, and it had all of the songs like Hot Chocolate, When Christmas Comes to Town, everything. This movie has always been a part of my life, and I'm glad that I can understand it more. This movie definitely gets an A+. It's a holiday lock. Also, side note, but last year, I learned that this movie was based on the Polar Express book, 1985. Also, I believe that it was referenced in all of the other reindeer when this guy had this vehicle named the Polar Express, and that was 1999. The Polar Express movie was 2004, so the Polar Express book was totally a thing, and I was surprised because my introduction to the Polar Express was through the movie. Whenever it's talked about, the conversation is always about the movie, and that's all I've ever known until last year. Now, I didn't actually read the book or seek it out. I'm not a big reader, but it was nice to know that this movie was inspired by a book, and maybe one day I can get my hands on a copy and compare and contrast. So yeah, that was the Polar Express. Now it's time for the Rudolph movies, starting with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, 1964. It's a story about a reindeer named Rudolph that was born with a red nose. I will say that throughout these movies, it seemed like the problem wasn't with the red nose, the problem was that it glowed. It brings into question, why isn't this movie called Rudolph the Shiny-Nosed Reindeer or the Glowing-Nosed Reindeer? But it just doesn't have that same ring to it like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. So yeah, because of this nose, it's going to cause a lot of bullying by the other reindeer. Comet even said that we're not letting Rudolph play in any more reindeer games, right? Looking at the kids to help him make this decision, so that's questionable. Also, the nose not only caused a lot of displeasure with the reindeer, Santa also didn't like it and said that he had no chance of being on the sleigh team like that. Even the parents, Rudolph's day ones, mainly Donner, didn't like the nose and tried to cover it up because he saw Rudolph as an embarrassment. Considering how Rudolph's nose gets utilized in this movie, it's tough to count it as a disability, but still, it's not a good look for the parents and Santa, the jolliest man on earth, to be treating Rudolph this way, just because he's a little bit different. The only person that treated him with respect was Clarice, this reindeer that Rudolph met at the reindeer games, and she was one of the original supporters of his nose, even though everyone was laughing at Rudolph. But she wasn't enough to keep Rudolph in Christmas Town, as Rudolph set off on his own journey and wanted to be independent and get away from the bullying. He's also going to meet Hermie, a misfit elf that wants to be a dentist, and Yukon Cornelius, and that's his squad. Yukon Cornelius gave me a line that I remember and still say to this day. When the Bumble, the abominable snow monster of the north, got his teeth taken out by Hermie, he said, "I tell you, you're looking at a mighty humble Bumble," because he was tamed or neutralized to an extent. And I always say that when like a fraudulent basketball or football team gets exposed, or when a player is like a one-trick pony and they get that taken away and they're just exposed. Also, speaking of Hermie taking out the Bumble's teeth, this time I actually realized that's what was happening off screen, which increases how I feel about him as a character. I originally thought that he was just a tag along, but he ended up saving Rudolph and his loved ones with his dentistry, so that wrapped up his story nicely. It's sort of tough to classify this as a Christmas movie that preaches Christmas values, along with a lot of other stuff that I've talked about. This movie had Santa and it took place in Christmas time, but this movie was more so for the misfits of the world, which I can totally relate to. And it shows why acceptance is important, even towards misfits, because the outcast might be an outcast because they're special, like everyone has their role in this world, and I like that this movie touches on that. Moving away from the themes, the soundtrack was amazing. Like, they're still yearly plays for me, despite being made so long ago, so that's amazing. This movie is going to get an A-. It's a solid movie for everything that I listed, but I would have liked to see more of that Rudolph and Clarice connection, or just Clarice in general. Like, she's an interesting character, or she could have been an interesting character. Also, this film shows its age sometimes, and I'm not even talking about the dialogue. Like when Donner was going out to look for Rudolph and the mother wanted to help, Donner said that this is man's work, to which that line definitely wouldn't go over well in today's climate. But yeah, it really wasn't dialogue based. It was visual where, yeah, this is totally from the 1960s, and a lot of specials that I've watched, especially ones released after it, came with better visuals, which led to a better experience. So that's going to hold this special back and keep it at an A- grade. Before I get into the next special, it's worth mentioning that there's a sequel named Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and the Island of Misfit Toys. It's about a new villain, the Toy Taker, taking all of Santa's toys, so Rudolph had to stop him. Also in this movie, Rudolph wanted a regular nose again, which backtracks on the progress made in the previous movie and feels like it's just an easy plot point. This wasn't worth a full breakdown or anything, but I'll give it a B-. It was nice to check in with the original Rudolph gang again, see how they're living after the events of that Christmas, see how Rudolph and Clarice's relationship developed, because at a point, she got sidelined in the first special. It was fun to see them in this movie, but this movie didn't add anything to my Christmas experience or experience with Rudolph that much. It's kind of like DLC in a video game. It's a nice side story. Alright, now it's time for Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the movie. It roughly has the same structure as the first movie, but this take on Rudolph has some differences from the original. First off, in this one, Rudolph was being born to Blitzen rather than Donner, to which I never noticed even last year, but yeah, that happened, although it doesn't really add much to the story. Also, Rudolph's love interest is going to change from Clarice to Zoe, and she was able to play a bigger role in this story, have more speaking moments and bonding moments with Rudolph than Clarice had, making her a better and more fleshed out character. His partners are going to change from Hermie and Yukon to Slyly and Leonard, to which I really don't care about the partners that much, but the original crew was much better because Rudolph had a misfit that he could relate to in Hermie, and Yukon was Yukon. The villain is going to change from the Bumble to Stormella, to which she's definitely better than the Bumble because this guy is just a brute, like he's only there for destruction. At least Stormella talks, so there's that. Rudolph is even going to have a rival or a bully, an Arrow, to which he never really had in the first movie. It was kind of just everyone ganging up on him. But these character upgrades and additions are going to make the world feel more alive. I made a TikTok about the Rudolph movies a few years ago. I said that the 1964 version is like the older brother success story of the family, while the 1998 version is like a, why can't you be more like your brother? But that was before I watched it last year and decided that 1998 was better than the original, and it's a shame that the superior version gets swept under the rug for a prehistoric production. First off, the soundtrack solos, simply having a wonderful Christmas time, show me the light and we can make it, just demolish everything on the soundtrack for the old movie. Also, visually, this looks much better for sure. And the biggest point that Rudolph the movie has going for it is the extra runtime, which gives it more time to establish the characters, Zoe in particular. I really wanted to see more of Clarice in the original, but that wasn't possible, and after the Reindeer games, she really just turned into a non-factor, while Zoe was a consistent factor throughout the whole movie, and there's just more to Zoe and Rudolph's connection than Clarice and Rudolph's connection. That was a big character upgrade. Also, another good character upgrade is Santa actually being good at his job in this one, being accepting towards the oddballs, and in this one, he's just flat out the jolliest man on earth, unlike the other one that was dismissive towards Rudolph until he found a good use for him. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer the movie is going to get an A. It's really good. Alright, now it's time for the final special on this list, VeggieTales, the toy that saved Christmas. The basic plot is that many years ago, there was a town where all the kids cared about were toys. But one day, a buzzsaw toy came alive and broke out of his box to try and spread the true meaning of Christmas and save it. This special was only around 30 minutes long. There wasn't much to it, but the reason why I like it and the reason why it's stuck around for so long and it's a yearly watch for me is, one, because of the song, I Can't Believe It's Christmas. But also, it's the best Christmas special for teaching the lesson that Christmas isn't all about getting, it's about giving. And although it wasn't the only special that got me to realize that, I'm glad that it was part of getting me into that mindset. After having embraced this over the past few years, I can definitely say that giving feels better than getting. Especially since I'm simple-minded, I have everything that I need already, so when I get the chance to give, it always feels nice. So yeah, this special is going to get an A+ for sure. Alright, that's everything. A lot of these specials have played a big part in my Christmas experiences. So it was nice to be able to go back, dig a bit deeper, and see what they're really all about and what messages and themes I missed out on when watching them casually. Really enjoyed making this video, and yeah, that's about it.